When it comes to socialism, I just think that there's a lid. That's how I see it. I think there's like still the top, and you can push only so hard, and at the end of the day, there will still be a lid. And with capitalism, there is no lid.
So I'm arguing for a market-based system that has enough regulations and encourages democratic ownership of the means of production, democracy, which our country is founded upon, to help prevent the negative externalities of capitalism that we're all suffering under, except for the ultra-wealthy.
Okay. Hi, my name's Kate. I live in Los Angeles, California, and I'm going to be arguing in favor of capitalism.
Hi, I'm Hunter. I'm also from Southern California, and I'm arguing that a system with more ownership by workers is a better alternative to capitalism.
So I think capitalism is the best form of system because historically, countries that have free market economy have had better GDP, have had more competition as a result because there's more companies, and as a result, those companies created better products because consumers responded to the products that they wanted to buy. So it created more competition. It's a better overall economy, and it has led to a better form of level for everybody as far as living. Countries that have historically lower GDP are also the countries that have more centralized economy, for example, such as North Korea, Cuba. When the government gets involved, unfortunately, it creates less incentive for competition, and overall, there's not as much, perhaps, want to improve the product, and they don't necessarily listen to their customers. And as a result, people have worse product and worse GDP and just overall a worse quality of life.
My fundamental argument is that every positive benefit of capitalism that Kate laid out can be attributed not to capitalism, but to a market-based economy. I'm arguing for a system that is, while under a market, a worker ownership-based system. Capitalism is the private ownership of the means of production to allow for capital accumulation by private individuals. Socialism is merely social ownership of the means of production, whether by workers, whether by the state, or whether by communities. So I'm arguing for things like worker cooperatives. And the reason why I'm arguing for this is fourfold. For one, it is more effective for certain things to not be a market and certain markets to be markets. Secondarily, under almost every metric that we can measure, worker cooperatives are more effective in a market-based system than traditional capitalist firms. Thirdly, the wealth accumulation by the billionaire class in America is destroying our society. And fourthly, capitalism enables bribery and partnerships between corporations and the government, which is allowing for the creation of a mass surveillance state that is spying on American citizens.
I think that the worker-based system has a couple flaws. One of the flaws that I would think of, for example, it would be hard to scale. So if you have a company that's only purely controlled by the workers, it would be a lot harder to scale because you have to make a decision that's basically unanimous or that fits all the investors. So hard to scale, that's one. And that's one of the things why I think capitalism works so well, because it allows, for to scale a lot quicker. It allows companies to form a lot quicker and to spread a lot better and quicker. And another problem with that would be is as far as investors. So, for example, if you're not really taking on other investors, if it's only controlled by the workers, how are you going to raise the capital? You would have to assume that everybody at your company is rich, or you just cannot scale to the level that you'd like to, because now you're only owned by the employees.
Well, to the first point, which is that's hard to scale, that is factually untrue. The seventh largest company in Spain is the Mondragon Corporation, which is a worker cooperative with over 70,000 employees. The much bigger issue, if Kate did directly did correctly point out is getting investors involved, which is why, under my own understanding of the best way to implement this, for one, there's different types of cooperatives. One is where you take a specific firm, and the specific firm is owned by the workers in the company entirely. A secondary option is where the workers have a controlling share in the firm, but angel investors are still fully able to invest in the firm. Another option is there are like agricultural cooperatives, and there are also cooperatives like, for example, REI, which are owned by the people who use the company, not the people who run it directly. And in all of those cases, with the exception of the first one, you can use capitalism and use the current systems we have set up to, with minor tweaks, encourage the creation of large worker cooperatives that are more effective under every metric than traditional firms. And the way that you do this is by making it more economically efficient to invest into worker cooperatives. You can do this through tax credits, or you can do this through regulation, or you can do this through properly, even just properly penalizing corporations for wage theft, which is the largest form of theft in America.
Thank you for bringing up the seventh largest company in Spain. I can guarantee you, I have no idea what it is, because the largest companies that we hear of in the United States, such as Tesla and Amazon, they're not workers and workers. I don't know what you call them, but worker-based economies. So those are not the most successful ones. And there's a reason for that. Also, companies that are larger companies, whatever, Amazon, Google, any of those, Teslas, government can also implement regulations for them. For example, they can give them incentives, if they're more environmentally friendly. So it gives them an incentive to not only have a good product, but also a product that they work with government along with, and a product that can help the environment. And if they have the capital for it, I think it overall creates just a better system for everybody that is controlled, that it has a competition, and that there's a want to improve and also a want to give back.
Yeah. Well, the issue with the argument for environmental regulations is a doctrine in U.S. court system known as shareholder primacy. There's first a court case in 1919, but multiple court cases after this sort of reinforce this standard, which requires a business to act in all cases in the best interest of its shareholders. This means that it is actually encouraged, if not required, for corporations to break the law and break regulations, as long as the penalty for doing so costs less than not doing it. If dumping toxic waste in the Mississippi River costs, let's say, $5 million in fines if you're caught doing that, well, you have to factor in A, the odds of getting caught, which is much less than 80%, and then compare it to the amount of money that you were saving by doing it. If it is over that 5 million number, or in this case, the example I gave, 80%, so over 4 million, not only is that economically viable, you are expected to do it by the U.S. court system, in essence. Under the current structures that we've set up, regulations are completely ineffective because shareholder primacy, that is capital accumulation, is required. And if you don't follow it, not only will you fall behind, but you can have your entire life taken away from you. Government regulation is completely ineffective under that system. The punishments have to outweigh the benefits of taking anti-social action.
So one really good point that you brought up is the regulation. So I do think capitalism is the best one, but a huge flaw that we currently have in our system is it's not really well properly regulated, and that's the biggest thing. I think capitalism can work really well, especially with entrepreneurship and just the overall incentive on having your own business, owning your own company. So I think the problem is the regulations and the lack thereof. Like you said, for example, the environment, it's not really well regulated. So I would argue that I think it's still the best, but I do think that there should be far better regulations in place, and there should be bigger punishments for companies that do not enforce those regulations.
I 100% agree with you on the regulations point. The problem is capitalism stops that from happening effectively. Let's look at one example, Flock, which is a company that, amongst other things, creates security cameras that can be put in cities to monitor gunfire or police location or search for potential crimes. Studies have shown that Flock left open over 60 Condor cameras around the country, which allowed for anyone to hack into them and download weeks, if not months, of data on private citizens. And the reason why this has not been effectively regulated is because there are direct government corporate partnerships enabling this to happen. And the reason why this happens is because under a capitalist system where we allow for billionaires and other singular individuals to accumulate enough power, control, and land to be able to not just buy a yacht, but buy NASA or buy off politicians, this creates a situation where the inevitable result of our current system is not just corruption, but is an active infringement on the American way of life.
Like I said, I think capitalism, yes, there are billionaires, there are people that are company owners, but at the end of the day, like, they didn't get there by inheriting. Like, luckily, when it comes to corporations, it's not like monarchy, they didn't get there simply by being born into that position. So people that are billionaires, they worked hard to get there. And I do agree that, of course, there's a greed and there's a huge amount of, wage that gets miscalculated when it comes to how much the CEO makes versus how much the employee at the bottom of the chain makes. Of course. However, it all takes time, and it'd be really hard to become a billionaire by just, getting elected in that position. It doesn't work like that. So I think billionaires, you have to work your way up to get there. You have to have good connections. You have to prove yourself. So not to argue that, yes, there should be billionaires, yes, but also billionaires who do raise the level of everybody's income. So like the company that they create, nobody's forcing those people to work there, so if they don't like how much money they're getting, okay, that's how much they're getting paid, and there's going to be a raise. However, there's no easy solution to this, and I do think that they overall do provide people jobs, and at the end of the day, that's what we need. That's what people need. That's what capitalism is about. It's about providing jobs and just creating a competitive market.
You know that that's not true in regards to billionaires. To paraphrase your own argument from Jubilee, where you were in the unhoused versus millionaires, that most people that are born into a specific economic class die in that economic class. It is much less likely for someone to start out poor than someone who starts out the son of a billionaire to become a billionaire. For example, Elon Musk, his father, Errol Musk, owned an emerald mine through a handshake deal back in the 1980s, directly profiting off of not workers, profiting off of child slaves who were mining emeralds. And through that wealth was able to create Tesla, one of the few examples you gave of an effective corporation. This doesn't happen under a worker cooperative system. This doesn't happen under a system wherein you cannot buy off governments to allow you to have these unethical, poorly ran firms, which benefit only the people at the top and not the rest of we the people. This is the 99.999% versus basically just the Forbes 500.
You keep bringing up like the worker-based economy. The question is the capitalism the best system? So other than the worker-based economy, do you have a different economy that you would suggest?
Yes, a socialist market-based system. Every benefit of capitalism, competition, ability to have productive firms to respond to the consumer, every benefit that you laid out in your opening argument is true of those systems as well, of all market-based systems. You and I agree that centrally planned, centralized economies, command economies as they're often called, have been historically ineffective. So I'm arguing for a market-based system that has enough regulations and encourages democratic ownership of the means of production, democracy, which our country is founded upon, to help prevent the negative externalities of capitalism that we're all suffering under, except for the ultra-wealthy.
One of the things that you forgot to mention was I also mentioned how important it is to have a drive for entrepreneurship. And when it comes to socialism, there's really lack of that, because if the government, is providing, what's the need, what's the want to really want to work hard? Why would I if everything's provided for me?
Socialism is not when the government does stuff, it's when workers or communities or the government owns the means of production. In this case, under worker cooperatives, the firms are ran by and for working class people. And by working class people, I do mean everyone, because I'm referring to people who work, not people who own the company in this case. So with a worker-based cooperative, you're actually looking at a fundamental solution to the principal agent problem. I don't know if you're familiar with the principal agent problem.
No, I'm not. Oh, I thought you were gonna keep talking. Okay, so I don't agree with you. It's agree to disagree. I just don't think that I would be very motivated if I lived in a socialism society. I think capitalism is better because it creates a drive to want to work your way up. And even though, let's say, like you mentioned, Jubilee, and yeah, statistically, you do end up in the class that you are born in, it still creates a drive and to want to get out of the whatever the if you're in the poverty, let's say, and if you're in that level, it still creates a drive and want. And of course, not everybody's going to be able to move up, but the people that do want to move up, they do have those they do have an opportunity. I would say, if they live in a capitalism society, I do think they have a higher chance of working their way up the ladder than if they lived in a socialist society or communist society. I think capitalism is creates a lot of freedom for people, and that when you have a lot more creative freedom, it's just it's easier in form of building a business, sustaining a business, and making your way to the top.
Okay, going to apologies. I passed it to you too quickly. Didn't realize that it had a 10-second cooldown timer for the principal agent problem thing. When the principal agent problem is the fundamental misalignment between the priorities of a CEO and the shareholders of a corporation. So under a capitalist economy, you are expected to try to make the most money for yourself by any means possible. For a shareholder, this means you want the company to make as much money as possible, right? But when it comes to the CEO, they're not incentivized to make the most money for the corporation. They're incentivized to make the most money for themselves. If they can make it look like they're doing the bare minimum and spend the rest of that time searching for a higher paying job, they should do that. And in fact, capitalism encourages them to do that because that's the best way for them to make the most money. Can you think of any ways that capitalism has devised to solve that? And also to sort of give you another question, because, the 10-second timer, what do you think the difference between a market-based socialism economy is and a market-based capitalism economy is when it comes to motivations, and why?
I think when it comes to capitalism societies, I think there's a lot less involvement from the government. So I would say that, as you brought up earlier, with government, with these regulations, I don't think government does a really good job when it comes to regulating like policies, and when it comes to just getting regulations from the companies. So I do think that when it comes to capitalism, it's just better when when it just creates more competition, and it just creates overall a more drive to like get more companies, get your company like franchise and stuff like that. And when it comes to socialism, I just think that there's a lid. That's how I see it. I think there's like still the top, and you can push only so hard, and at the end of the day, there will still be a lid. And with capitalism, there is no lid. Like you just the more you whatever the more profit your company makes, that's for you. I think that's why it's better.
The fundamental issue in most socialist economies and also capitalist economies is the profit of the company not going directly to you, which is the issue with the principal agent problem. The way that corporations have solved this is by making the CEO a shareholder, aligning the class interests between the shareholder and the CEO. The harder the CEO works to benefit the company, the more money the CEO makes. Under a socialist economy, a socialist market-based economy, the only difference between capitalism, market-based capitalism, and market-based socialism is that all members of a corporation are partial owners of that corporation and therefore are motivated to work as hard as possible to make the company as much money, so they make money as well. The harder you work, the more money you make. It's every benefit that you think of capitalism, but actually provided to you in a way that capitalism does not provide.
The important thing to think about is also how large are these companies we're talking about. Are these companies 40 employees, 400 employees, or 4,000 employees. Because when it comes to shareholders, yes, it's easy to make a decision when you have only 40 people that are in charge. A lot harder to make a decision when you have 4,000 employees, and to get 4,000 employees to agree, I think it's a lot harder. And also, let's say you only have okay, do you want the mic? And I think also it's a lot harder to get investors. Let's say if your company is really small, 40 people, your company is small, it's a lot harder to attract investors in order to franchise your company and franchise your business. So I think it depends on the size of the company, and of course, there's benefits to some. Maybe the worker-based companies, and it does work, but it depends, I think, on the size.
Yeah. We're talking about, in certain cases, corporations that are larger than 70,000 employees, larger than most traditionally run firms by a large margin. And that sort of comes back to the basic problem with capitalism. That in some cases, you are incentivizing behaviors that are destructive to society, whether it's surveillance.
Oh, it cut out. Well, I do agree, yes, of course, that in some ways, it is destructive, but again, it depends on the company, what size, and what the company really does. Yeah.